Let's talk a little bit about what we just watched at the Olympic Stadium, West Ham Stadium, and what it is that we can unpack. What it is that if you are close to the subject and you care intensively, you've been watching and putting little things together for a while, you'll feel and know inherently, and stuff that if you are just critiquing Liverpool and don't really watch every game or watch just highlights, you'll feel about this side and probably be missing some of those details. And I think the details, especially in the end of an era when you're watching things kind of come apart, are very important. Though the speculation is very fun, it's not necessarily what I'm interested in. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about what we just watched, right? At the Olympic Stadium. Liverpool, I don't want to say it was a capitulation. I think it's a little bit more than that. I think the overall headline here is that the emotional intensity and the intensity of what this Liverpool side have been going through is beginning to take its toll upon this team. I think there are certain members of the side who are either feeling the pressure, want to get towards the end of this journey now because they realize it is a great chapter of their lives coming to an end, and they don't quite know how to close that book, write the last sentence, finish the page, close the whatever, right? And close the gate, however you want to put it. There's loads of different metaphors you can apply there. But it's clearly taking a bit of a toll. There are a lot of people who've had great opportunities under Jurgen Klopp, people who will be a little bit confused in this side as to what their future is, what their immediate but also long-term footballing careers are going to feel like without the comfort blanket, which is essentially what Jurgen Klopp has been in recent years, of a Jurgen Klopp. They won't know what an Arne Slot or what a Michael Edwards or a Richard Hughes or any of these people are going to feel about their footballing abilities, whether Michael Edwards signed them or whether they fit the new footballing style of Slot or whatever it is. Change will inherently feel not great for a lot of these players because, well, you know what? Some of them it will. Some of them will probably want some of this change. And I think a lot of this has been coming for a while now. But whether you want the change or not, there can still be good and bad factors that you will not necessarily be able to anticipate. And that unsure and lack of grounding feeling that these players will have will undermine some of what they've been working towards. Having said that, I think Klopp actually made a really good point in his press conference. And I wish I'd made a video the day before that because I wanted to speak about this in the video. But at the start of the season, I don't think anyone gave Liverpool a chance to even be in this title race. I can't even remember where I placed them in the table. I definitely put them in the top four, but I think it was like one of those ones where we felt like we would maybe be a little more comparable to a Manchester United or a Chelsea this season than where we are now. Like 20 points, 30 points ahead of Chelsea, 28 or something like that ahead of Chelsea. And that's fair enough, right? I think based on the previous season when we saw things fall apart, there wasn't much. There was probably evidence to say, hey, this team will do all right, but there wasn't much to go on that this team was going to have a complete revival and have very, very strong games and a confidence wave that we could go on, right? And then I think there are some very typical Klopp factors as to why this came apart. There was a very strong tactical surge midway through the season when Klopp began to get the players clicking. There was a lot of confidence within the side then. There was a good structure in the midfield. He worked out a lot of the opposition plays against those, and he was able to undermine those, go against those. He was able to refresh a lot of what the team were doing. Some of the people who maybe were part of the older football that they played weren't there anymore, and the Hendersons and the Fabinhos. And some of the new midfielders look for different passes. Some of the older players were beginning to be the kind of leader that you want in a team. But there was also a question of, have a couple of these people outstayed their welcome? I'm not saying that, Klopp gets to 7 years and then suddenly his effect and his impact on the side changes, but I think managers are definitely aware of the impact they can have on players and the frustration that can come from not being able to impact the players in the same way. The feeling of powerlessness or the feeling of disconnection that you can feel must not be a very pleasant one for someone like Klopp, but also people like Salah. Also, some of the younger players in the side who will feel that they want to have an opportunity, but if you're pushing for a title, to give a young player an opportunity in there, like Harvey Elliott week in, week out, Fabio Carvalho if he was still within the team, Stefan Bajcetic, would you want to rush him back from an injury? Curtis Jones, if you see that he isn't playing the football you've asked him to, can you then play him within the team? Conor Bradley, very unfortunate with injury, very unfortunate in his personal life. I know Trent's been made vice captain. I think that's really fantastic. I think it's a great move, and I think it works. Cool, but he's still very young. Kwanzaa. There are names that I could just keep going on and on and on, right? But the point is, a lot of these unsure, shifting factors can have an undermining impact on the side. And I think, therefore, when you play a team like West Ham, a team who's very good at undermining you, a team who's very good at needling you, a team who probably knows that you're relatively low on confidence because earlier on in the week, a team that sat deep and counterattacked against you, which is what West Ham want to do, did do damage to you. A team that know that you're not necessarily as confident as you should be in taking your opportunities, but also that you aren't defending your goal in as confident a way as you should be. That people speak about the defence for Liverpool as if, and they really should be confident. Like if you look at that back line, you could genuinely say Trent, one of the best fullbacks in the world, not necessarily the best right back, but fullback, like roaming fullback. Konate, probably one of the best young talents. Kwanzaa, one of the best young talents, or up there in terms of young English talent. I don't know where he ranks within Europe. Van Dijk, a legendary centre-back and someone who's clearly still towards the very top of his game. And Andy Robertson, someone who I think now we don't really know how to feel about in the same way because the system is asking something different. But how does that work? And then you will understand that these players probably had no idea that Arne Slot, before he was even rumoured, was going to be one of the candidates. To see Xabi Alonso, sure. To see Amorim, sure. Those seem fairly obvious. And possibly like a Van Dijk or a Gakpo or maybe a Gravenberch will look at Slot and go, Slot, I don't know whether it's a Schlot or a Slot, and go, yeah, that makes sense. Like, this is from my native. I understand it. I see that league regularly. I know my family follow that. But other people won't have been following that in a similar fashion, right? And he was not one of the top names on the list, despite him being followed by Barca and Bayern. But the point is, a lot of people will have looked at that and gone, we're at the end of an era now. There is a feeling of like a lack of closure with Klopp that I think we're currently getting. We will probably get that the last day of the season. We'll probably get that when we know how it finishes, where we finish in the table, which is probably third at this point, but let's see. And with that, I think there are moments and kind of changes within that where at the moment we don't know how to react to Salah reacting to Klopp in that way. At the moment, we don't know how to react to players not having the intensity, despite having the system and despite having the passing and the energy, but the lack of finishing, the lack of the 1% focus that you need seems very evident to me at both ends of the field. For Mikel Antonio to be wide open like that must be very frustrating for someone like, well, first of all, any of those defenders, but also Alisson, who's like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, just defend the whole goal? And then the same for their first goal, right? Like, again, frustrating to concede. Liverpool have really struggled to clear their lines in recent weeks, really struggled to do what was necessary, but also so obvious and also so fundamental, so simple, that you should be frustrated with some of these performances. They've underperformed their XG conceded, and they've underperformed their XG scored. And you've got to question, where would they be if they'd have fulfilled some of that? That's not to say they did dominate a lot of the games. That's not to say that they deserve to win, but what would it be if this team was to perform at their maximum? And why is it that there has been such a distinctive drop-off? To say Klopp shouldn't have announced, I think would be weird. Or unusual, should we say. And my main reasoning behind that is, I think the players would know anyway. I think it's hard for Klopp, a manager who wears his heart on his sleeve, is very public about the way he feels, knows that it's not just about going out there and setting up a starting 11, but finding a way to motivate them, finding a way to push them through, finding a way to give them something to feed off. He knows that's a very fragile state that these players find themselves in. And I get it, like tactically there is going to be some frustration, but picking over that now, it's not useless. You know, I don't think Klopp and Pep Lingers have necessarily solved the problems they've been put in front of them, should we say, towards the end of the season. Is that because they can see the light or they see the end of the tunnel at this point? Possibly after that TNT interview that Klopp gave. But is it also because they don't know how to solve some of these issues? Because they are struggling to get through to the players? Because they have their own dynamics to justify and to reconcile with some of these players right now. Players who they will want to get to listen to them. But they know, like, so I turned to some of the people I was with today. I was like, some of these guys don't look engaged. Their body language is not the same swagger that we see before. Some of them look tired. They don't necessarily look exhausted in the way that I would have thought, hey, that guy looks exhausted. But they look beaten sometimes. And that's frustrating. That's sad. But you can see emotionally it's hanging on some of these players, the frustration they feel, the fact that some of them will know what their future is, and they won't want to go out there and get injured. Or they won't want to go out there and, I don't know, like, I don't even want to say they don't want to sacrifice. I'm sure they're very professional. But when you play under Klopp for such a long time, and it's all these margins, and that those margins, the 1% change seems to make a 10% difference or 20% difference in a game, you've got to question, if you had a seesaw where you had to put 1% pressure to get 20% gain, after a while, putting the 1% pressure, the 20% starts to weigh back down. Do you know what I mean? That'll begin to go down very quickly. And that balance is a hard one to strike, because you know that 1%, because it's so much heavier, is going to be difficult to keep for such a long time. Like, keeping that balance is difficult. It takes concentration. It takes thought. It takes genuine engagement. Some of you might be frustrated or sort of saying things like, talk about the game, whatever. It's not that I think it's pointless. I think there are still some very meaningful games at this point in the season. But I'm looking at the cohesion in the team. I'm looking at Harvey Elliott starting. I'm looking at Ryan Gravenberch. I'm looking at Gakpo. And I'm thinking, is that a statement from Klopp telling us, like, these guys are still engaged and these guys aren't? Or I have to rotate because some of these guys are tired? And then to see the way that Salah was coming on, I think Jurgen Klopp probably understands to have an angry, I want to say altercation, but I mean interface with a player before they go onto the field could be okay. It feels like a public show of disrespect to Klopp. And it feels frustrating as fans because we want a nice fairy tale finish. And a fairy tale finish, well, guess what? Nasty things happen in fairy tales. And actually, I think a lot of people miss that. That's a really crap cliche thing to say, but you get my point. Like, fairy tales are full of tragic, horrible things that happen to people because they weren't aware of the consequences of what was going on. And I think the consequences and the outcomes of where the past 8 years have taken us, the incredible emotional highs, the incredibly close moments, the things that other fans will not understand, and the humiliation or kind of feeling of, it is slipping away, that you can't control necessarily when it's like right there, is hard to, in the moment, due to the pressure of the situation, justify. That's not something that will be there next season. Sure, there'll be pressure on the team, but you won't have Klopp gone. You might miss him for a little while. You might mourn a loss as a fan. You might think, hey, this is the end of an era, and that's horrible. You have to go through a mourning process with that. Not like you lost a family member, but you get what I'm saying. So, what I guess I'm saying is, this is understandable. Doesn't mean it's justifiable, but I can understand it. This team thought they were going for a title, and maybe that was just a little too far. This team felt like they were on something, and what next? And those highs then going into another era, knowing there is another manager coming, not knowing how they'll feel about you, not knowing how you'll feel about them, that's a lot. And you can see, genuinely, some of these people, I'm not saying they're disengaging, look a little conflicted as to how to approach this situation now. And I think that weight is a lot. Some people will call that crumbling. Some people will call that capitulating. Some of it will call it bottling it, whatever you want to call it. I could care less. But in the moment, obviously it's frustrating. But it's weird because I sat in the stadium today and when West Ham scored, when Liverpool scored, all of it just made sense, but it felt so separate. Maybe that's because of the terrible experience in the Olympic Stadium that everyone has, because it just feels a million miles away from the pitch and it doesn't look like real football. But you get what I'm saying, right? Like, I just went, yeah. I've got a lot of videos to come out on Liverpool over the next couple of weeks, a lot of things to unpack, a lot of moments to unpick. There'll be some exclusive Patreon content, so I'll put a Patreon link in the description and there. And there will also be a lot of action in the Discord, so go down and get involved there too. If you haven't already done that, go and comment below or get in the Discord and get chatting. I think the title has slipped away from Liverpool. But at this point, it doesn't feel like revelation or something I need to say in this video because it felt relatively obvious at this point. Don't be sad because it's gone. Be happy because you ever had it. That's how I feel about Jurgen right now. As weird as that might sound. See you guys in a little while. Much love. Bye.